Okay.
Hi, we're live.
Oh, we are live. Hey, all right, here we are. This is the big debate. Part
It is.
two. It's probably the most important one, right? Well,
I don't know. We'll see how this goes.
we'll see how it goes. Yeah. So anyway, last time I got to go first talking about what fiat is, and since all of you now know what fiat is, well, I'll remind you in a minute. But I think we're gonna let the capitalists start things off, and so I'm gonna hand it over to Blair.
Thank you, George. So we are going to be talking about the difference between shareholder capitalism, which is the current state of being in the world, and your concept of fiat. So let me define shareholder capitalism for those who may have forgotten or don't have the words handy. This is a model that prioritizes shareholder returns, so profits, dividends, and stock price gains. That's the world we live in right now. And the benefits of that model are it's simple and it has produced extraordinary results. And I'll talk about some of those results. So, in the big picture, here are the outcomes that we've seen since we have adopted shareholder capitalism globally. Extreme poverty rates, people who are living in extreme poverty, has declined dramatically, particularly from the mid 20th century on. So, before the system of economics, over 80% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. That's going back to the early 19th century. Today, that's less than 10%. So, that's a dramatic decline that we've seen. Average incomes and GDP have risen manyfold. So we've seen strong growth correlated. And obviously, and even more extremely, that growth has been the best for the poorest decile of people globally. We've also seen life expectancies increase substantially. The global life expectancy has roughly doubled over the long run. And that's actually driven by better nutrition, public health, medical technology, and higher incomes. Those are all results from shareholder centric outcome. Just to put some numbers on this, in the early 19th century, life expectancy was below 30 years globally, if you can imagine. Um, and today it's over 70, and obviously higher than that in developed economies. So, how has global shareholder centric capitalism helped? Um, it's mobilized capital and it's lifted people out of extreme poverty. It's improved health outcomes. And so obviously you're going to argue with fiat that there's going to be trade-offs and that there are negative consequences involved. Of course, there's trade-offs to everything. I'm going to say adding fiat risks stopping this glorious engine of success. And why would we want to stop that? Because it's that engine of success that's going to provide us with the innovation that we're going to need to solve some of these problems that you're going to talk about. And so I would just say, in closing of my opening statement here, that fiat, fiduciary standard to all stakeholders, not just shareholders, would unnecessarily stifle innovation. And it would remove that clear, simple objective, which is to maximize profits for shareholders. So I'll let you go.
Yeah, wonderful. Wow, what a beginning. This is hard to argue against because I completely agree with all of these wonderful changes that have occurred. We've been in an incredible growth period for the last 250 years, and it's delivered these things where Blair and I can now debate this on different continents
Yes.
and share it with all of you. It's an incredible thing that we're part of, and these are all innovations, absolutely, that have been that most of them wouldn't have arrived without shareholder capitalism. So, and one of the things I feel a little bit like it's a sucker punch, fiat versus capitalism. It's not fiat versus capitalism. Fiat is capitalism. It's just capitalism looking at what is it that what do we need to tweak as we become global? What are the problems that arise in capitalism? And how do we shift so that those problems are automatically addressed? We've talked a lot about sustainability on the planet, and I think right now what we really need in an economic system is an economic system that is automatically sustainable. What Blair is talking about in terms of the innovations needed to solve some of the problems that we have, couldn't agree more. Shareholder capitalism is stifling those innovations because the way shareholder capitalism works is that all the money goes to a few people. So all of the innovative ideas are squirreled into what is it? Private equity, hedge funds, venture capital. We need the whole planet to be thinking together. I mean, this is what's changed. We're now in a global world, and what we're seeing, the problems are moving so much faster than we can cope. We have global warming that we don't seem to be addressing at all. There's the threat of war that's growing ever present and all over the world. We have AI that we are just feel totally unclear about what will happen with it. With some people coming up with some horrific examples of what might occur. But I think what is most worrisome is what has happened. That we talk about negative externalities. Negative externalities are unintended consequences of the model. So here we have this incredible model of shareholder capitalism. It did not intend for the earth to be owned by 3 people or by 26 people. That's not it did not intend to have that degree of inequality. But in fact, that's where we are right now. In America, where perhaps most of you are listening from, 3 people own as much as 180 million people. And worldwide, 26 people own as much as 3.8 billion people. That inequality is worse when you look at what's happened to the centers of power. So we used to have something that we call a democracy in America. And right now, virtually every cabinet member and the president himself, they're all billionaires. So where is that? Where is that? We're now, so they're going to solve all of our problems. They're the ones who are innovative. I think we need to believe in the entrepreneurial abilities and enthusiasms of people who are free. And and instead of that, we're handing it all over to this very narrow sector of our society.
Mhm. Those are all great points. And income and wealth inequality is absolutely one of those negative outcomes that we've seen from shareholder capitalism. And so I want to talk about the 3 I's today. And the first one is investment, right? So in the title of this debate, we have scaling globally, right? Scaling globally is essentially um, taking investment and multiplying it by the small investments or large investments of billions of people, right? For what purpose? The purpose is for efficiency. We're spreading the wealth around the world, and innovation, right? So, what are the benefits of of scaling globally? Companies have access to larger markets and higher potential revenue. And there's no limit to who can be owners. And I think one of the ways that we can address solving income and wealth inequality is to open and incentivize and encourage more ownership of all people. And there's no reason that we can't do that. But we may need to scale our financial firms globally in order to do that, right? We get economies of scale when we scale globally. So lower cost as volumes grow. Lower cost brings those products and services to more people who can now afford them. And it's sort of a self-perpetuating cycle, right? More people can buy them, more profits, more reinvestment, and actually more income, hopefully to more people, which is, I think, one of the reasons that we should explore how to improve shareholder capitalism, maybe not change it, but improve it. Um, you know, Companies also get access to global talent. Not all of the talented people are in one country. And so now you've got talent from all points of the globe working towards one goal with a globally scaled corporation. Basically what we're doing here when we're scaling globally is we're sharing the wealth of rich nations with poorer nations. And that continues that cycle of lifting all boats, which is what we've seen under shareholder capitalism with global poverty rates in such decline. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's allow innovation to continue to solve these problems that are caused by what you call these negative externalities. We're going to need that investment in innovation in order to do so. And I'll give you an example. Um, you know, Burning fossil fuels. The outcome of that was to produce energy, not necessarily to cause climate change and problems with the environment. Well, where are we going to get the investment to find the next technology in renewable energy sources if we don't continue under shareholder capitalism, maximizing those profits. And I think with adding fiat, we risk cutting off that economic engine and fueling our future growth to solve such problems that we're going to talk about.
So it's interesting. I haven't heard, I mean, it all sounds wonderful, Blair, but I haven't heard one thing that actually argues intelligently that we're going to be cutting off shareholder capital. That's not going to happen under fiat. Fiat is still, you still have a shareholder model. It's just that it asks the governance, the CEO, to pay attention to four things. It asks that each corporation not place their own self-interest ahead of the truth. That's the main one. Why would we ever? Why would we ever? You talk about shareholder capitalism, but we are allowing these media companies to really tell us things that aren't true, and it's undermining our ability to work as a democracy. So a second thing is that they're undermining democracy itself. They're undermining the planet. So I haven't heard anything that says how fiat would limit investment, because you're still going to have people investing. They're still going to be looking for sources of income. They're still going to be saving, investing, and using those savings to retire. So it's wonderful what you're saying, but it doesn't counter the fact that we have these enormous negative externalities that are arising, and those negative externalities. Yes, we could solve them by having this hierarchy of power, and to some extent we need hierarchy, but we're stifling the entrepreneurial endeavor of millions of people. How can you possibly justify 26 people owning as much as 3.8 billion people? How can you justify it? How can you justify billionaires controlling the media so that the population, here we are. I mean, it's global, right? And humanity has gone global, and yet we are being controlled by a very, very small number of people, because we only have shareholder capitalism, and we have it in a way that where and it isn't just only shareholder, it's that the only fiduciary responsibility in shareholder capitalism is to profit and to shareholders. Fiat says, no, no, you've got to have responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility to the truth, to democracy, to the planet, and to people.
Yeah. And I've played many, many games of Monopoly in my lifetime. And I can tell you, when all those dollars flow to you and you win the game, it's a great feeling. But you're right, everybody else is gone. And now you have no one else to pay your amazing hotel fees. So you make a good point there. But you asked, how are we going to address this problem, or how would fiat stifle innovation? So let me just pack some meat onto that.
Yeah.
So if we were to go away from shareholder only to now stakeholder, or everybody, all people, all employees, all customers, the planet, every animal, every organism, right? What we're doing is we're removing that simple model and we're adding complexity, and complexity will add to the cost of investing in projects. So first of all, we would have diffused accountability, right? There's fewer. It's difficult to figure out who are we accountable to when we're accountable to everyone. You can't please everyone at the same time. I would argue that there will be higher costs through compliance drag, right? So how do we comply with the fiduciary standard? How do we handle the legal risks that we're now open to because we're accountable to everybody? That's going to raise costs. It's going to raise the cost of projects. It's going to cause managers to have a hard time figuring out where to reinvest, and they become less risk taking. Less risk taking means less innovation, less growth in the future. So there's a reduced incentive to invest in disruptive change, right? If you think about disruptive change, sometimes in the short term, it actually harms stakeholders, right? Innovation in automation could lead to fewer jobs, right? So can we take the risk of innovation knowing that, we might be at risk of a lawsuit from layoffs, right? So it's that murkiness that's added by the fiduciary standard to all that increase the cost of investment and will potentially lead to capital flight out of certain areas, right? Will capital want to go into some of these risky projects like biotech and AI, which you talked about earlier? Well, do we want to be responsible for the AI that goes rogue and ruins the world? Think about the liability risk there. So these are some of the ways that I believe a fiat standard could potentially stifle innovation and investment.
So, wonderful points and classic, I think, from the capitalist standpoint.
Right.
The complexity adds to cost. Let's look at each one of these: stakeholder versus shareholder. So, shareholder, we now see when you have three people own as much as 180 million. You can't even put 180 million on the screen. Three people own as much as 180 million. So, where is the system that we have of fiduciary caring for the people, is it in fact caring for the people? Is it caring for democracy? Is it caring for humanity? Or is it caring for the shareholders? And among those shareholders, yeah, there may be a billion shareholders, but three of them own as much as 180 million in America. So that's where the money is going. That's where the power is going. That's where the decision making is going. And that's extremely inefficient because it means that the brilliance that humanity has, that each of us has, is being stifled. The only people that have that kind of resource that you're talking about are the three people at the top. And I'm exaggerating, maybe it's 300, maybe it's 3,000, but it's not humanity. And we've gone global. It's time for humanity. So when you talk about shareholder versus stakeholder, and that it's a little unclear how fiat might deliver to stakeholders. That's certainly true. We're at the beginning of a movement. We've just gone global. 90% of humanity now owns a cell phone. So if people who own cell phones received, rather than billionaire misinformation, billionaire disinformation coming to them, so that they can actually trust what their cell phone tells them, so that they trust that the cell phone and the media sources are really aiming at the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Don't you think humanity could make decisions as opposed to just having our autocrats or our oligarchs make decisions? So, you talk about it being clear. Yeah, well, it's clear if just three people are going to manage manage the planet, it's going to be clear. But we've got humanity to take care of. We've got the whole Earth. We've got all the creatures on the Earth. The Earth's burning up, and how have we made any progress toward that? We had Earth Day. When was it? 1969, 1970.
Yeah.
How much progress has been made since Earth Day by shareholder capitalism toward solving the problems of global warming? And the answer is none, very little. So another issue here is we're talking about complexity adding to cost. We haven't even begun to look at the cost of repairing the earth. We don't look at the cost of massive poverty, of the loss of the geniuses in all of these different cultures, not contributing to solutions. And now they can because we have social media that can take us everywhere. It's incredible. So the costs that we're talking about are costs that the three people at the top are going, I don't want to pay that, because their palatial, wherever they're living, it will not be covered. So the other thing is about risk and taking risky investments. Free people are unlikely to take risky investments. When you have 8 billion people, you're going to find a lot of people taking risky investments and challenging the earth, challenging democracy, challenging sources of capital to do things in ways that are extraordinary that we haven't thought of because we've limited now our social media, now our news to just a handful of billionaires that are controlling it. So we're losing a lot. We're losing a lot of innovation. The costs to humanity are enormous because of the loss of our genius coming forth.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out how fiat solves these problems, though, that you're speaking about. So if we now make the corporation every company liable to everybody, what's the mechanism for reducing this income inequality? Is it instead of trying to raise the income of the many, that we're trying to now raid the wealth of a few? And how do we do that through fiat, right? Because now is it through the courts? We now have lawsuits that will come and win judgments against these few people who have been the main beneficiaries of capitalism. Although many billions of people have also, as I talked about in my opening statement, benefited. So I think it's a relative argument there, right? Because if the whole world has benefited in some way from capitalism, do we need to focus on, you know, what's going on at the top? I would say yes, right? And there are mechanisms for doing that. We've used them in the United States. Other countries may do a better job of figuring out how do we make sure that as this wealth accrues to the few people, that it is properly and fairly redistributed through whatever mechanism that might be. I'm confused as to how fiat is going to be the solution here. It's a little murky. And back to taking risks with smaller amounts of money in entrepreneurs, if you instill a global fiduciary standard, now the startups have more risk and more cost, and it's even harder for them to get off the ground under this scenario where they are now liable to lawsuits from anywhere, right? Workers can sue over layoffs, communities can sue over pollution, NGOs can sue over supply chain and labor conditions, right? So I would argue that it's going to be harder to have more people get into the system if we increase those costs and the compliance and the legal liability that would come along with. Now, if you hold yourself out as a corporation, you are liable to all stakeholders. I'm interested to see which attorney is going to represent, the small fish in California that's going to lose its estuary because we're going to dam it up and try to find a way to move water to create more crops or whatever it is. That'll be an interesting case, because what you're saying under fiat is that now animals, and we are animals, but other types of animals might have a legal incentive to sue us. That could be a really interesting and but also murky situation that we could get ourselves into.
So wonderful points, and really interesting that at this point in the conversation we come to regulations and lawsuits and attorneys, and it's how we've kind of run the world in a way, and to some extent it's benefit as you've shared early on, Blair. Um, the we need a different way of understanding governance within corporations, within nonprofits, and within uh, um, government itself. The and you say, how is this going to happen? How are we going to? Who's going to be held accountable, and how are we going to be held accountable? A couple of things here. One is that already there are 10,000 what are called B corporations in the world. We've worked with ESG standards for a number of years. They're beginning to be undermined by the current administration in America, but they've influenced companies all over the world. All over the world, major companies have been looking at how do we actually pay attention to the environment and social issues and governance issues. So the committees that are required to think about this. The structures within organizations have already been set up. They're there, and the corporations are thinking about it seriously. It isn't law. It hasn't been made law, and now, as I say, it's being undermined. B corporations, in particular, have paid a lot of attention to, for instance, how much income. What is this question? This question of income inequality that has gotten worse and worse and worse. So that, as I say, the so-called free press is now dominated by billionaires. Um, B corporations have paid attention to that. How much should a CEO make in relation to all the employees that are contributing? What is fair there? Is it fair? I mean, it's a very artificial design that we have that so much money goes to the top, but it is a negative externality of capitalism. Capitalism is a hierarchy. So the thing that happens as capitalism grows and as you scale to a global size is that that hierarchy accumulates all the power and all the money. So the old way is regulations and attorneys. This other thing that I want to mention in terms of governance, we really need to think differently about sustainability. Humanity, we long for a world where our institutions are trustworthy and humane. All of humanity longs for that. And that's not a world that's filled with lawsuits and filled with regulations. It's not a world that's filled with attorneys. It's a world that's filled with organizations that internally, like the beginning of ESG and like the B Corporation, that internally are listening to the environment around them, listening to what's happening, what they're doing, what their impact on the earth, listening to their impact on their employees, listening to their impact on the communities that they're in, listening to their impact on equality and inequality, listening to their impact on democracy. What are the major values that humanity needs to be sustainable, not for 10 years or 20 years, not even for 1,000 years, but for 1,000 generations? We're right now we're in a very artificial environment. Um, my One of my daughters said to me the other day, we were talking about how companies were organized, and I said they're hierarchies. She said, "What's a hierarchy?" And I said, "It's like an outline. You've got the top, and you've got a bunch of things underneath it, and then a bunch of things under that." She said, "Dad, we learned how to do outlines when we were 6 years old in grade school." And I said, "Yeah, that's right. That's how complex our business world has become." But you think about another realm here. I mean, what I think is we need much more listening, and we've started that, and we're at the bare beginning of it. I think when you think about what the structure of an organization, of a capitalist organization should be, clearly shareholders part of it, clearly service to your clients is part of it, and clearly service to the truth and democracy and people and planet are part of it. But ultimately, for it to be sustainable, it has to be something that is moving inside and out with an incredible quality of listening that is trustworthy to everyone. Let me give you an example of a structure that does that in the world right now. You just look around you, and what do you see? You see trees everywhere. So, what is the structure of the leaves of a tree? I'm not going to talk about the whole structure of a tree, but an average oak tree has 500 million leaves. Five and 500,000 leaves. 500,000 leaves.
Okay.
Still an extraordinary number, right? What company has 500,000 employees? If 500,000 leaves. And each of those leaves is listening to their environment. They're listening to the wind, they're listening to insects, they're listening to the rain. And we're standing there watching them sway in the wind, and we're going, wow, that's so amazing. We're touched by them. There's a humanity to our relationship with them. And that humanity, that relationship with them goes far deeper because they're also listening to the sun, and they're doing photosynthesis with the sun. The most amazing thing that they're listening to, they are the lungs of the tree, and they are breathing in carbon dioxide and breathing out oxygen so that all of us can thrive. They don't need regulation. They're not hampered by a lack of regulation. They don't need attorneys. They're sustainable because of the structure that they have. We need to move toward a structure that is listening so thoughtfully to the environment around it in the governance of an organization that that all of us that we trust it, and that trust is proves to be worthwhile. If you have that kind of governance rather than a governance that's just going after profit, you're going to have far less um, lawsuits, far less regulation, because they will have the systems where they'll show, no, we've been listening to this. This is really important to us, and they'll show us how. We need to move to a sustainability of organizations similar to a tree if we're going to have a sustainable humanity for thousands of generations.
Well, I certainly agree with you that the biosphere is an excellent model for sustainability. Still unclear as to how we force humans to mimic, because all we have done since our beginning is act in basically against, but to our own benefit, right? First, we learned how to farm, agricultural society, then we learned in industry. Now we're moving on to technology. And so, in a way, if we are going to use the sustainable model, by definition, we have to slow down, reduce profits, which will reduce innovation, which will reduce technology. So the question is, how do we slow that train down without causing massive harms um, to the whole? And so I'll go ahead and give my closing argument. And I'll also say thanks to those who have been with us on this journey. If you want to type a question, you got George Kinder here. Please chime in. But I would say, we share the same ultimate goal. We want a world that's more prosperous, fair, and sustainable. The question is not about our values here, it's about the mechanism. Um, and so, what system delivers those outcomes in practice? And I would say the answer history shows us is clear. So, over the past, century and a half under shareholder capitalism, global poverty has fallen by 80%. So, less than 10% of the people in the world now live in extreme poverty. Life expectancy rose, doubled, and average incomes have increased sixfold. So, no other economic model in human history has lifted more people out of hardship or unleashed more innovation. By contrast, a global fiduciary standard would replace that clarity with confusion. It would require every company to balance the demands of every stakeholder in every jurisdiction: workers, consumers, governments, communities, and the environment, and without any clear way to decide among them. What you describe is beautiful, George. I don't know that human beings can rise to this level of coordination. I want to hope. I'm hopeful about the future, as I'm sure you are. But I don't think that the result would be moral harmony, but legal paralysis. Executives would face endless litigation, investors would face uncertainty, and entrepreneurs, the very people who drive innovation, would face bureaucracy instead of opportunity. But I hear what you're saying, that you don't believe that that would happen. But I don't think capital flows towards confusion. It flows towards clarity and reward. And if we make investments less predictable, we'll get less investment. Maybe that's a trade off we're willing to accept because the negative trade offs of where we're going have been so large. And so I'll make that concession to you that maybe we should accept a little bit slower growth, a little bit less investment for the sustainability of this one place that we have to call home, right? It's existential in a way. But I would argue that we need to try to do that by evolving shareholder capitalism and without destroying the growth engine itself. So I guess we're both kind of saying the choice is not necessarily between capitalism and conscience, it's between a system that has proven to lift billions um, or one that might paralyze that growth. So I would say let's definitely work towards improving the system that we have, not replace it with one that would freeze the very dynamism that makes human advancement possible.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Blair. And I totally agree with all of the numbers that you're describing. I'm proud of what we've done, and I'm really concerned, as most people are in the world, about climate change, about diminishment of human rights, about the threats to democracy, and all of that really coming from the massive inequality and the ownership of everything, including our media, by just a few people. That's what's really not sustainable, except maybe for them, but only for a brief period of time. Because what's happening now is that I mean, you go onto college campuses, and the students are despairing. They feel like, where is the world going? And they're coming out and looking at jobs, and they're feeling like this isn't meaningful. And it's not meaningful because it doesn't touch the ideals that human beings have fought for, have lived in the midst of uh, forever. The ideals of democracy, the ideals of truth, the ideals of care for compassion and care for planet and for fellow human beings. So and I do agree that there will be a time, there has to be, where these questions that you're raising about legal paralysis and lawsuits will begin to populate in some way. I don't think they're going to really happen because I think that what we will be doing is we'll be building into the system great listening. I don't know if you know this, but I probably have shared it with you, but I don't know if the listener knows this. Scientific American in December of this last year came out with an article talking about how much faster listening is than thinking.
Mm.
Listening is 100 million times as fast as thinking. Lawyers are full of thinking. Regulations are full of thinking. We've established our civilization. We've established it and our businesses on thought, on thinking, on systems of thought. When listening is far faster, far more profound, and delivers freedom. So I think that there's a real shift here that is going to happen in terms of relationships. You talked about all the numbers. I love the numbers. I'm totally with you, and I'm fascinated. I'm a number person from way back. But in fact, numbers don't touch the human heart. And what we need from our organizations is something that humanity's longed for forever. We've longed for a system that is humane and trustworthy in everything it does. And it is time, now that we are one planet, one earth, one people, one humanity, it's time for us to figure out how to do that. It's time for us to establish something that is sustainable. I think it's doable. And I think it's doable without the complications that you're suggesting. And I think it's doable. Yes, I think profits may diminish a bit because how can you have to take care of the climate, or you have to share with people. There's certainly going to be less profit for those three people. I hope there is a lot less profit for those three people, but there should be a lot more profit for humanity because of the trustworthiness and the humane quality of our organizations. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think everybody, you mentioned the college students. I think there is a yearning, and you can read it sometimes in thoughtful articles about the economy and the system or podcasts that you may listen to. There is this yearning for where do we go from here? How can we make a change? And so I think we both agree that there are improvements to be made. It's just a question of how do you do it and how do you do it in a way that's not destructive. We did get a question, George,
Oh, great. Cool.
from William Merritt. I hope I'm
Mhm.
saying that right. If you go to the average corporation with this, their response may vary. May very well be, I'll do it after a reasonable number of other corporations do it. So nobody wants to be first. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's the problem, Bill. I mean, if it's Bill, that's the problem because, and I think that's why Blair has very generously been willing to debate me here. The problem is that fiat is something that can really make a difference. It's very simple. It's simplistic in many ways, in all the ways that Blair is talking about. We're at the bare beginnings of trying to solve this problem, even to understand what it is, to analyze it. And what we need first of all, if this is to happen, is really a grassroots vision that many people go, yes, I think it's time to make all of our institutions trustworthy and humane, truthful and humane. And if you have that vision that's grassroots, corporations will follow. And I think that's really why I'm here in the debate with Blair, is to try to spread that message. Um,
Yeah. And you've mentioned truth a few times. I think that that is a fascinating aspect of the fiat topic, and maybe that could be the topic of our next debate, if we do one, because as I'm listening to a podcast right now about the scientific method and, how do we know if Tylenol is risky for pregnant women or not, and what is the data that we have? The scientific method is always evolving. What we know to be true is always evolving. So that is a difficult topic, especially now that all of the information that has ever been written is available at 90% of the world's fingertips in our cell phone. A cell phone, by the way, that we may not have this quickly and this beautifully if we applied a fiduciary standard to all. We would have probably slowed it down by a few years, I would argue. But I do think that the concept of truth is a really fascinating topic here. It's a little different than what we talked about today, which was scaling globally and economies of scale and negative externalities. So I don't know if anybody else has a question. You're welcome to type it. We're going to kind of close up here. It's been 40 minutes, George. That felt like 5.
Woo! Yeah, that was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And I would trade a bit of slowdown in growth anytime for solving the Earth's problems, for sustaining democracy, for giving hope and a sense of trustworthiness to our institutions so that people all over the world really believe in all of humanity, that we're going to make something really incredible. What's going to happen over the next 1,000 years? We're going to do something amazing, and we're setting the standards for it right now.
Yeah, I
Perfect.
agree.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Yes, I'm excited for the future. I remain optimistic in the long run for forever. So I
Yeah,
thank you, George, for inviting me back on
yeah.
to have this important debate. And let's
Wonderful.
let's plan the next one.
Thank you, Blair. Let's do it.
All right.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Yep. Bye.
We're going to close out our app, so you're going to need to do it too.